Sahana bhavatu, sahanau punaktu, saha viryam karavavahai, tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace unto all. So, since we don't have any Vedanta series question and answers tomorrow because of Foundation Day, and I'm also busy here in France, we can include some questions and answers today also. But I think I chose a topic, something like reactions from deeper levels. And so what does this mean? There's the background to the whole drama that is illustrated in the Chandi. It's very significant because those who are familiar with the story will know that there was a king called Surata and a merchant called Samadhi, and they were driven out by their own people. Both had identical circumstances. And so they suffered a similar pain. Anyway, they met in the forest. They decided to go to the Forest Hermitage, where people go to get a little peace of mind. In other words, find out a nice place in nature, forested area with their trees, protection, and where nobody will disturb you. And so they wanted to get that peace of mind, and there was a saint there in the forest who taught them the glory of the Supreme as the Divine Mother of the universe. And when the instructions were complete, they both went to the riverside nearby. They repeated identical prayers. And of course, they started from the same painful experience. So up to this stage, both the merchant and the king were exactly situated. And they also had the same teacher, the same instruction, same prayers, vision. They were both offered the same boon, but there the similarity has ended. Because at the last moment of your life is extremely significant. But if you say in terms of time, there's a river of time, and every second is the last moment, we have to be careful what we put in it, because thought is the most powerful instrument, weapon that we have. Anyway, with all this similarity, they asked for different things at the last moment, or they had the different intention. And so when the consummation of their discipline came, everyone, each one, both of them, reacted in his own way. Because we can't predict how a person will react. We can put people through all these disciplines, study scriptures and so on and so forth, religion, what religion has to offer, disciplines. We can do it according to a plan, but the outcome is unpredictable. So the king, unable to dissociate himself from his pain, the things that caused his pain, he asked for the restoration of his kingdom. May I come back as the sovereign there? And then may be granted unbroken overlordship even after that, perpetually. In other words, he begged for a bigger field of relative experience. But relative experience gives us pain. He never learnt that lesson. The merchant, on the other hand, had enough of the so-called power and enjoyment of this relative existence, this relative plane, and he asked for the highest possible illumination. And he got it immediately. And so when we talk about religious preaching even, It has to undergo tremendous revolution if the psychological truth behind this particular story can be widely grasped and can be put into practice. So the key point is, how do we react? However we react, if we sustain our intention, we'll get the result. But whether it's good or bad, the universe is not deciding for us. We ourselves are deciding whether we learned a lesson or whether we're going to repeat the lesson. And if we learned the lesson, what will we ask for? You can see it's something like the atmosphere. Right here, we are under atmospheric pressure. But as we go higher and higher and higher, the atmospheric pressure changes, and the air becomes thinner and thinner and thinner, until ultimately there's no pressure whatsoever. And that is like that. At which level, at which altitude do we want the mind to settle on? And of course, once we know we have the possibility that there is rarefied air somewhere, we can go up and down as we want without getting caught in it. So whenever a difficulty arises in our life, instead of getting engrossed in it, instead of repeating the same mistakes, getting the same difficulties, followed by a complaint, oh, what a pity, poor me, this happened to me again, what is wrong with me? Am I attracting all this? Yes, you are. Why don't you take a different altitude? Why don't you raise the mind up to a different level? And if we use the analogy of the atmosphere, there will be different levels, of course. You can progressively go up. You can't just come from the atmospheric pressure on the earth to the rarefied atmosphere that is there above the clouds. There has to be a steady climb. You must have noticed in an airplane, you don't suddenly take off and go vertically up. There has to be some horizontal movement, progressively climbing on an incline, and ultimately getting to the highest. But what are reactions? Everybody has to measure these for themselves. Most reactions will be based on what we are used to, what formula we have previously used, regardless of whether it works or not. Only when the pain becomes more acute will we perhaps learn the lesson of wisdom. And we all have the opportunities. In the case of the Chandi, the two characters, the king and the merchant, they both had the same pain, that is, rejection. And both of them lost the material effects of that, of all their life's work. And there must have been some internal shifting toward jealousy, regret, guilt, shame, humiliation, anger. All of those things might have come out. But they went to a forest. Now, we can't easily just go to a forest. In the ancient days, it was easy. The forest was simply across the road. There were very few built-up areas in those ancient times. So what is our forest? Can we make a metaphor for a forest? Yes, you see, we can set up an isolated place in our own house and make that the heartbeat of the house. And we can resort to there from time to time, preferably at set hours, morning, evening, as a minimum. Select suitable, auspicious times of the day where things are a little quiet, and retreat there, sit there with no expectations. Just with the idea, let me see if I can allow my mind, my breath, or the whole of my interiority to get elevated, to get into some kind of rapture. Let me do that repeatedly until I have a solid base. We can call it blissful base. And from there we can operate. So that whenever we have a difficulty that presents itself, that's the nature of nature itself, we have a kind of headquarters to go to, a blissful base. That is an extension of the physical place that you have, your shrine in your household. It becomes the heartbeat of a home. But you can actually resort to the innermost cave of the mind itself, because the external shrine is just a symbol. In temple worship, for example, in South India, the central, most important section of it is where you get darshana. Darshana means a sight. But before you get the sight, you have to do a peripheral pilgrimage. You have to go from the outside progressively to the inside. You can get great value for it if you do it in a prayerful way, repeating set prayers or repeating things from your heart, or doing japa, until you eventually come to the center. And in this, you can have any intention you like. You can have an intention for something else or somebody else, or you can do it for yourself. Of course, the highest reward comes to the merchant in the story. He wants illumination. Illumination means, let me shed light on the truth, assuming that everything is dark. The king, on the other hand, for him, everything was light. In other words, darkness looking like light. There was a confusion. See the prayer, Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotir gamaya, mrityo amritam gamaya. So lead us, please, from this ignorant state, assuming the reality, but it's unreal. In other words, this relative field. Lead me from my engagement and involvement in the relative field to that where there is absolute freedom, where things don't change, where there are no divisions of space. Because of that, where I'm absolutely in my equilibrium. Only one thing is there. Or lead me from darkness to light, all right? Lead me from ignorance to knowledge. But there has to be an assumption in all of these prayers that we are living in a relative world and we need to be led to some other realm, an absolute realm. Not immediately necessarily, although it's possible. And then lead me progressively from darkness to light. It has to be acknowledged. An acknowledgement, I'm in the darkness. I cannot see. My eyesight is poor. I'm a little blind. I can see fuzzy things, but not the full thing. And then lead me from death to immortality. Everybody wants to get out of death. Not knowing that there's a different area within me, as it were, that is completely immortal, immune from death. It remains the same when everything else changes. The body has to change, no doubt. And the body is living, therefore it has to die. The body was born, therefore it has to die. It's not a major tragedy. The great Sufi poet Rumi had a wonderful prayer that he used to recite. I can't say exactly the words, but it went along these lines. When they carry me in my coffin, don't cry for me. Don't cry for me. I'm getting out of this world. I'm going into the light. I'm getting into immortality. And the last person you should weep for. But you can weep for yourselves. That's the added addendum to it. And when people grieve, somebody died, we have wonderful soft language for it. Passed away. Or their demise. But nothing really passed anywhere. Everything, just what we call the material body, we can't register as Rai. Rai is another name for matter, and it really means food. There's a food and there's an eater, consumer, energy. And the whole of life is an interplay between this. Now, if we can notice that, emphasize that, we'll use a different formula to solve our so-called difficulties and problems. We won't go along the old line. We'll find a new approach, a new avenue. That requires a certain willpower. It requires a resolution. If we have the resolution, if we have the enthusiasm, if we make the effort, then we can make new pathways, neurological pathways in the brain. This is how Swami Vivekananda describes what we now call today neuroplasticity. That the brain is something very pliable. You can imagine it as some kind of city with a number of different pathways and roads and avenues, highways, byways. And if we allow it just to stagnate, most of it unused, we'll become something like brain dead. We won't be able to change anything. But no progress comes without change. So we have to be prepared for change. It is said that nobody likes change. Now here at the ashram, we were walking, and one of the students said, look, to illustrate this, can we walk backwards? So everybody turned around. Normally we'll walk forwards. Everybody's working backwards. In other words, getting out of your comfort zone. Even in a train, I've noticed that the vacant seats which are there are the seats belonging to people who don't want to go backwards. Somehow they feel uncomfortable. Personally, I have no problem with it. I can sit and go backwards. In some cases, I enjoy it. But there are some people who feel, no, I'll get dizzy. I'll have to face in the same direction the train is moving. So without change, nothing can happen. Without the will to change, nothing can happen. I gave a different example. I told the participants, if you're wearing a jacket, please take it off. Take note of which arm you took out first. Put it back on. Take note which arm you put in first. Now do it again, but do it in reverse. That is, if you took the right arm out, then take the left arm out first. If you put the right arm in when you put it back on, do it with the left arm first. And most people who try this will feel extremely awkward because of conditioning. People are being conditioned to do things in a certain way. And conditioning has a benefit, but conditioning also has a deleterious element to it. What is the benefit? You see, if you establish a good habit, you should not change it. But if you establish just a non-thinking habit, just to broaden the mental field and exercise and flex your mental muscles, try and do something different. If you're going along life with advancing years, I always tell people, what you should do is make a hobby. Pick something, learn something new every day. If you have no interest in physics, take up an interest in it. If you have no talent for art, it's all right. Art is an expression. Take up art. Take up poetry. Do something that you've never done before. These days, people who feel that death is the absolute end, and therefore they have to squeeze as much as they possibly can in this life, have what is called a bucket list. And they put all the kinds of things that they ever wanted to do, and then set about achieving them one by one. Well, this will give you a great advantage in the sense that you're exercising this neuroplasticity. You're getting more enthusiasm for life. And that's an antidote to stress. But on the negative side, there's an assumption. This is the only life we have. And then what are we postponing? This thing called death. And will we face it? Well, everyone should face it. And should face it in a factual way. What we call a human body is nothing but yesterday's pasta and potatoes. We have to get used to that idea. And if you stop eating, the example from the Chandogya Upanishad is, you see, stop eating, fast, then Can you recite certain things? No, I can't do it. No, you see, your memory has gone. So we require basic provisions, food, sleep, that we require. But if we can regulate these activities in such a way that the whole mental field becomes placid, calm, not dull, but with no anxiety, with no worries, with no difficulties, so that we're able to stand back and approach things in a rational way, in a measured way, and a way that serves to elevate our own being, that creates a kind of neutralization in the mind being full of waves and disturbances, and creates such a calmness, such a peace in the mental field that it becomes a reflector. We're able to see through the calm waters, as it were, of the mind. And there we are able to see the revelation of who and what we are. The illumination that was sought after by the merchant is not gotten through meditation. It's not gotten through karma yoga. It's not gotten through discernment and jnana yoga. It's not gotten through songs and devotions. All of these are ways of pacifying the mind. All these are conditioning elements to purify the mind so that it becomes like a crystal where we can discover the truth that is already there within us. Can't add to it, can't take away from it. It is always full. It's not born. It never dies. This we find repeatedly throughout the Bhagavad Gita as a key statement for encouraging somebody in great difficulty. From the Bhagavad Gita's point of view, the Arjun, who was in such a terrible, terrible emotional and psychological state, suffering from grief in anticipation of slaughtering those he loves. How do you deal with such a nervous breakdown, such a disturbance of the nerves and the breath? Well, you go straight to the heart of it, straight to the spiritual foundation. You don't hesitate to do that. You are divine. Your nature is such that water cannot wet you, fire cannot burn you, wind cannot dry you. You are yourself, the only immortal self. And then have a look, see, will you value things differently? And you will. We start off by looking for that same component in everybody else. This kingdom of heaven within, we start noticing behind every person, regardless of their behavior, every circumstance, every scene, every place, every event, behind things constructed from time and space and causality. Seeing through this network, seeing through this kind of woven fabric of what we call life, we'll discover something extremely profound in us and others everywhere. And then an opening takes place to say, yes, that same entity is flowing through all of these things, all of these parts. And then, as in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 15th chapter, the Lord is careful to say, I digest the 4 kinds of food. It's not that the gastric juice is doing, I myself am doing it. When we have the mealtime prayer, Om Brahma Panam and so on, Brahma Havye, we are creating a kind of internal drama, a kind of poetic expression that inside the stomach there is a kind of digestive fire. We call it Vaishvanara, that which is digesting, that which is giving life, a life-giving entity doing that. The Lord himself is doing it. And we are seeing that same principle in the offering that we're putting in, as if we're putting into sacred fire. All the components that are there, the fuel we are putting in, and we're putting it in with the sacred hand, a sacred means of offering it. And it all ends up with, if you see this in everything, if those who see Brahman in all actions, they go on to Brahman. They go on to the highest, the supreme principle. Unfortunately, having said the prayer as a habit, during the eating process, everything is entirely forgotten. If we were to remember it, we would be extremely selective about what we eat. We would take it as a prasad, as a sacred offering. We would put it very carefully in to the digestive fire. We would chew it the appropriate number of times. And with that attitude, what would happen? This food then becomes nourishment for us, as opposed to the material it gives us indigestion. It would all be sacred. It would all be sanctified. Then the body itself will be sanctified. The mind itself will be sanctified. The instrumentation will be purified through pure food. Pure food is to do with vibration. It's nothing to do with health and hygiene. It's food that is prepared with love. You go to a restaurant, I don't know if they prepare with love, and they may have sneezed on it several times, who knows. Their job is to make a kind of manufacturing process to feed as many people as they can, and everybody dines nice and calmly. But behind the scenes, people are shouting. Behind the scenes, people are working furiously to get things on a plate and pass inspection, and then the waiter brings it out calmly. You must have noticed if you watched some of these live kind of kitchen scenes. So what is pure food? Pure food is food that is prepared with the key ingredient, that is love. Love, concern, a givingness. And then you eat it lovingly also, making sure you understand it's a divine object offering to that which is digesting your food. Will you make it difficult for that being? The other day, we were discussing the merits of ice cream because the weather has now become a little hotter here. And I said, no, I don't eat that. Why not? Because the Lord, as Vaishvanara, is digesting my food, creating digestive fire. Why would I want to make it difficult for him by putting something cold in here? And then the poor Lord has to readjust the body temperature. And the effects, of course, are immediate. The nose starts streaming because lining starts being activated. So, and of course, not to mention the fact that there's a combination between fats and sugars. And we know when carbohydrates and fats are combined from experiments, it creates two things. It creates obesity and it creates addictiveness. And many, many countries in the world are facing this crisis that even children are now in the obese category. And so not only children, but I'm told that monks also, Buddhist monks who go and beg their food, used to be slim and trim, they got lots of exercise, but now the quality of the food has changed. It's now become extremely rich in the diet. And of course, the poor monks are sitting there, meditating nicely, sedentary lifestyle. And we have gotten used to modern sedentary lifestyles. So every aspect can be elevated to the highest. The body can be elevated and redesignated as the Lord's instrument, the Lord's earth car through which he does his work. The mind can be elevated to the Lord's sitting room, where he sits, where he resides, where he can be found within, where he can be worshipped in meditation and prayer and japa. And the hands are his, not mine. These are his hands. And so every activity I can do, either metaphorically or literally with the hands, is all as a sacred offering. It's all done carefully, knowing that this energy is not mine, these hands are not mine. Therefore, every work is the Lord's work. Every work is an expression of his eternal grace. With this, I can elevate the mind. and then with a discerning attitude that understands this world is ephemeral. Why should I give any other due respect to the relative world other than the fact that it is where I am? Can't avoid it. But the real expression that we call relative existence is that same divine expressing itself. Where else will it come from? That divine is pure consciousness, and every expression is also conscious and consciousness. There is sentiency in everything. There used to be a time where modern biological science would say a virus we cannot classify as a living entity. But with the increase of study of virology necessitated by such things as COVID, how can anybody say that? It knows how to adapt. It knows that the fact that it is not self-replicating, it's using another host, is beside the point. It knows how to do that. It has inside-it knowledge. Where does that come from unless it comes from a supreme knower, a supreme conscious entity that is expressing itself, no matter how crude, no matter how simple and uncomplicated it is, right to the very highest, most complex creature, man himself. So complex and yet so vulnerable. You can do away with the body in a few seconds if you choose to. That's all it takes. Finished. This complex, highly designed entity called the human body, so intricately engineered, I don't for a moment think it's an accident. The materialist thinks, oh, it's all an accident. It's not structured in any way. It's all just a mistake. Well, no. The mistake is in valuing it like this. When you value it properly, you'll see it is a manifesting effect of a glorious manifester. Religion calls it God. Not something in the heavens, not something above the clouds, not an entity with a long white beard and flowing hair, not an entity who gives us difficulties and prods us and pokes us with the ambition of making life the most difficult we can. No. Some childish ideas about this entity have to be lost and left back in childhood. And much better there. We have to have new ideas. But these ideas are simply advancements of the foundation of the old ideas. Swami Vivekananda says we don't go from error to truth, we go from truth to higher truth. We don't dispel all the other things. We don't say, oh, it's only stories, or put it into cartoon form and degrade the whole thing, as some atheistic minds might do. No, you take it for its relative value and go deeper and find out, explore what is the story. I take, for example, in Genesis, the idea of Adam and Eve. We have a little fun with it, of course. So we can say, if you have a childish perspective, well, what was poor God doing before he was creating? Was he bored? Was he tapping his fingers and thinking, you know, I like gardens, let me make a garden. And then, of course, having made the most exquisite paradise of a garden, he decides, no, I don't actually, I like the garden, but I have no fancy for gardening, no interest in it. Let me make a gardener. So now he makes Adam, see? And then Adam says, oh, I can't really manage without a partner. So while Adam is sleeping, the Lord steals a rib, doesn't ask Adam at all, just all of a sudden the rib is gone. And Adam wakes up in the morning looking for his rib and sees there Eve next door. And you see the story is a little difficult because Adam doesn't even inquire, where did this person come from and where did my rib go to? So all these stories have a value because it's not just stories. What it means is if we take this life as a kind of useful garden where we can express our joy and notice the beauty and insert beauty along with it by ourselves doing work otherwise called gardening. Then, of course, there's a tree, forbidden fruit. And Eve is forbidden. Please don't go to this tree. Don't take the fruit. Naturally, curiosity takes place. And God is not careful enough to just leave it there, but points out the tree itself. Don't take. Human nature being what it is, you head straight for it. Takes the apple. This is the tree of knowledge. But we can say knowledge of what? Knowledge of the relative existence. In other words, the interpretation of it being real is actually ignorance. It should also equally be called the tree of ignorance. And most of us are eating the fruit from it. That is the fruit of, or the effects of, mainly power, greed, mainly desires which ultimately give us increasing pain. Gives us stomach ache if we eat this forbidden fruit. So there is a merit in such a story. We need not put it into the category of a caricature, but we can teach it to children. And by the age of reasoning, let's say 9 years of age, we don't say all this is nonsense. By the age of 15, we don't declare at college. You see all those religious stories. We should abandon all of that. It has no value because we listen to some prominent atheist, one of the apocalyptic atheists, for example, Richard Dawkins and so on. And we say, no. There is deep value in this story. And why not make it entertaining, but understanding it's a story? Use the story well, please. So we have that story as a background to the Chandi. We have that story as a background to biblical traditions. And every culture has stories. I was seeing a documentary of people who migrated ultimately from the Blanket Islands off the west coast of Ireland, and how they tragically had to leave their homes and so on, and how they lived a beautiful, rural, simple life, isolated, no doubt, from everybody. At some stage or other, we have to revalue our situation and we have to make a decision. But one thing that sustained the communities on these islands over years and years and years was the capacity to tell stories. And that became part of the Irish art and culture. The art of telling stories, either verbally or in song and verse, with accompanying music and instruments. Every culture will have this way of conveying something about this relative existence and inferring something profound behind it. We're all on this great spiritual journey, this great grand pilgrimage. And in this, we have to take the knocks of life. How can anybody who wishes to be happy ever ignore the valuable lessons of pain? It's much better to do that. Supposing somebody is suffering from bereavement, somebody in their family has died. Those families or those people who have not experienced that will say sorry, and then they won't know what to say because they've not experienced what the other person is going through. It is only somebody who has been a refugee and the vibrations of such a status that is able to truly empathize with those stateless, homeless people increasingly in this modern world. This empathy is a great, great equalizer. It opens up the heart. So often in the Vedanta philosophy, we study philosophy as if this world is unimportant and does not exist. This world is important, and it does exist, but it exists relatively. It's only there in relation to the sense organs that pick it up. It's only in relation to the interpretive faculty of the mind. So to say that this is unreal in the sense that it is in a dismissive sense will not be correct. What we mean by unreal means it's impermanent. Something suddenly appears, an elephant suddenly appears in a room and disappears. You'll rub your eyes and say, well, it wasn't really existent. It was existent for a moment. So also this life is existent for a moment. And the circumstances you're finding yourselves caught up in, the progression of time, also lives only for a moment. That should be sufficient to say some permanent entity sits behind that, some entity that watches it, enjoys it as a witness, as a knower, as a thinker. Some entity stands there. Let me try to stand there. In devotional language, let me stand where God stands. Let me sit on God's royal throne and beam from there and see what things look like. Things will look very different. It will be full of, it will be infused with divinity. You'll notice its infusion and you'll catch that. And you'll also notice that there is a suspension of the breath along with it, an elevation of the spirit. Supposing you can sustain that. If you are able to sustain that, won't you always be joyful, blissful? Will you not always be overflowing with it? Will you not always be friendly? Will you not always be loving? It's not something that you artificially create. It's something that naturally, spontaneously will bubble over, isn't it? That's worthwhile cultivating. And it only comes from shifting the attitudes and accessing deeper levels of reality. And that in turn gives us deeper levels of reactions, because things look completely different when you shift your perspective and are able to evaluate from a detached point of view, a point of view that is able to see, I'm not involved in all that. I'm not caught up in all that. And yet I was. And because I was, I can now apply empathy to others. Walking in the other person's moccasins, that's how empathy is described. And then have a penetrating vision to go beyond that and to see, Lord, there you are, full and free and perfect. What a glory, what a glory. So these are something to do with these reactions. And so I said I would combine questions and answers today, since we are not going to have it tomorrow. And so if there are any questions from this so far, I'll unplug my microphone so you can ask.
Pranam Swamiji. I mean, you touched upon this in the talk, right? Like, the determination that we should have towards going this path. And I'm just recalling, the workshop that we had with Dr. Usha Vastre, and she was saying that one of the key factor, to have that determination and willpower is the reason or the purpose that you find in life that gives you the factor on why you want to do it. So my question, Swamiji, is I know, I mean, like everybody, has got a Swadharma that probably we have to find. But is there a common purpose and meaning in life for all of us that doesn't depend on external factors, external, or other person or situations or opportunities or anything?
Yes, there is only one purpose in life, one long-term purpose in life, one enduring purpose in life, a permanent purpose. That is to realize your own divine nature. There is no other purpose that anybody else has. This is why you're here. And natural evolution, nature itself, is pushing you from within and pulling you from outside, so that everybody will unfold and arrive at their highest destiny. And our philosophy says that every atom is moving and evolving towards its own freedom. How we get that freedom will be entirely based on our individual experience, because if you want to build a building, you can't have, and 12 people are involved, you can't have everybody as the architect. Some have to be a plumber, and some have to be an architect, no doubt, and some have to be interior decorator, somebody has to be a bricklayer. You get the idea. So we are born with individual talents in order to ensure that there is dharma. Dharma comes from a root, the thing that binds and holds things together. And what binds everything together is harmony. Supposing you have a shirt and all the threads are operating in disharmony, you no longer have a shirt. You have something that is called threadbare. You have to knit all these things together, and then that's fine, everything moves together. The whole universe is operating in rhythm and harmony, and every individual is a mini universe. So what knits everything together in harmony is called dharma. If we are able to take our individual talents and abilities to see how they can fit in a harmonious way with others, everybody is born for a specific individual purpose. But the unfolding, the way in which this dharma works is that by following this, we get moksha. That brings out 4 actual aims in life, according to tradition. Dharma is cultivated at studenthood, that area of life that gives us an opportunity to be good citizens, doing everything in a socially harmonious way, a way that is harmonious with the greater universe itself. And then artha, wealth creation. Of course, we can't do anything without sustaining the body and so on. We need material needs we have. But how do we avoid being greedy? You have to have dharma as the basis. And then artha becomes legitimate. And then at a certain stage, we have to fulfill legitimate desire, karma. Let us fulfill our journey. Let us not make it dull. Let us make sure that all the things that we are designed to get and enjoy, we can do it. But all of these are leading to a certain purpose, central purpose, general purpose, because all of these areas previously mentioned contain pain. Because pain is the natural accompaniment to positivity, natural accompaniment to pleasure, natural accompaniment to the drive toward pleasure that we call desires. The more desires we have, the more pain we're likely to have, no doubt. So nature has a way of being our guide and teacher in a motherly way and says, my dear person, you have to go through this adventure and you have to bump your head from time to time. And when you wake up a little bit, you have the opportunity to look in a different direction and please get your freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from boundaries that are pain producing. Ultimately, freedom from pain, psychological, physical. This is our goal. This is our purpose in life. And if you want to have a resolution about it, if you want to have determination and resolve, then life has to give you some hard knocks. Can't avoid it. But then, wherever there's a gap that nature provides for it, something useful and glorious flows through it until we discover our own true nature. So that is the prayer. That is what is behind the prayer, Asato Ma Satkamaya. It defines a purpose. We need to head for reality in its absolute sense. That means we have to understand the restricted nature of the relative reality and go forward from there. We're at the moment operating in darkness, thinking that we're full-sighted, but actually we are blind. Let us please get the full glory of total sightedness. Let us try and understand the totality of things. Get out from our narrow-minded point of view and see the totality. So 2 purposes are there, and the one purpose will shift from studenthood to householder life to all these phases. You may have a certain goal at the moment. When the goal is fulfilled, another goal is there. But overall, there has to be a central drive. That is a central purpose, a general purpose that all of us have. Everyone is a pilgrim on this journey.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yes, you see, to do anything, you must want to do it. So often in a person's career, they don't want to be doing what they're doing. And then they suffer from this anxiety, which is the most energetic draining component in our life. I'm doing something, but I'd rather be doing something else. How do we combat that? Through karma yoga. Through taking the future away and saying, I'm not interested in it. I don't want goals. Goals are useless. Unless there's a central goal somewhere of life called moksha, freedom, and other goals in life will be there, described as dharma, artha, kama, no doubt. But if you spend your time orientated toward goals, then you'll suffer from anxiety. Post the goal and leave it, and then enjoy the journey. Like the great philosopher Nissan, the car manufacturer, said, see, life is a journey, enjoy the ride. See the delight. Then you get more happiness in this life because you're not cutting it off. You're enjoying it as it is, because behind it is the beauty behind the beauty, the reality behind the reality. That shining, all beings shine, all things shine. Say the Upanishads, Tameva Bantam. That shining, all things shine. The sun shines because there's that entity behind the sun. The earth spins because that entity stood still and wove a cocoon called the earth around itself. Your body is living with all your social circumstances woven around it because the Lord of the universe is standing there saying, come on, my child, do you notice me? Do you see me in yourself and in others? So I'm going to leave it at that then. And I hope the weather is as good there as it is here.
Sorry, Swami, I have a quick question. A lot of people these days, especially in the West, say that, to be in a non-monogamous relationship is closer to real love because, you're free to love other people. You're not trying to, they say it's unrealistic to be with one person. And actually that what they're doing is more, true love. I'm using inverted commas here. And I just wondered what your take on that, and is there a benefit of just the union of one, or do they have a point?
Well, you're asking the wrong question. You're asking the wrong person because I'm a monk. So I have a monogamous relationship with God. But you see, this modern idea says that if you want more pleasure in life, then you get more of what you want. Same argument. If you enjoy cake, eat more of it. But then you'll get diabetes, I think. And if you ask some married people about monogamous relationships or more than that, or polygamous relationships, they will say, I have one headache is enough. I don't really require more than that. You see, it's not about monogamy or anything like that. It's about, do you see God in the other person? And am I forming relationships because I love myself more than anybody else? And I want the pleasure and I want the harmony. Why don't we love everybody? If by that you mean non-monogamous relationships, of course, let us love everybody equally everywhere, including the rogue, including the robber, including the saint, including the fat person, including the thin person, including the person who wants to hit me, and including the person who wants to love me. Included in the spider, if I have a fear of spiders, as well as the peacock. Equally everywhere. Yes, that's what we should cultivate.
Thanks, Swami.
You see, there are some societies who, because of their social circumstance, will, of course, not be monogamous, but that's providing society with something. And if we have a generosity of spirit, we'll look to these relationships to see how they contribute toward the social good. And so it was well known, for example, in the ancient days, that kings would have more than one wife because they would have to get progeny to succeed in the kingdom and so on, things like that. And the other area would be true. If you take the Mahabharata, then it was, there was a non-monogamous relationship the other way around. The queen had all the Pandava brothers were her husbands. So there must have been some period of time where that was seen to be necessary. In warfare, where there are lots of widows, what will you do with them? So in Muhammad's time, you would have seen the necessity for that, but restricted it. 4 wives can be there, not more than that, on the condition that you can maintain them all. So, but these are all social conventions and norms with society in mind, not individual pleasure in mind. We have to be loving enough and broad enough to serve the best for everybody, all inclusively, the whole of society. This is the way we approach things like marriage and things like that. What kind of partner would you like? Well, no, that's not the issue. What kind of child do you want? If you are determined what kind of child you want, then the suitable husband or wife will come along. That was the thinking. All these things are for a greater good. Generosity of spirit, a love that excludes my own self, and it is therefore makes the whole society stronger. And that would be really Swami Vivekananda's definition of morality. The behavior that makes everybody strong all around, stronger. It's a great, great criteria that can be used. If you're in any doubt about any moral direction, you apply that principle. A wonderful thing. And then the ethical principle, the highest ethical position will be the least egocentric, the least egoistic. These are very beautiful criteria for determining morality and ethics. All right. Any course of action has to be based on this value of strength. Ignorance is essentially weakness. What is sin? Sin is ignorance based on weakness. All right. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thanks, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.